What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another map analysis video. Today we're doing Anubis by JD40, Roald, and Yakuza. You may have seen that I did a lovely interview talk show hybrid with all those three aforementioned gentlemen and Cat Food as the co-host. So if you somehow missed that, go check it out. It's pretty cool. And as we're getting into this particular map, you may be wondering why this hasn't already been done, particularly since I decided to go and interview those guys about it. Truth be told, I thought that because the map itself was actually in the map pool for Counter-Strike, it was added to competitive, not like pro play, but obviously it's available in matchmaking and stuff. I really didn't see, it didn't seem to be super important for me, some guy who mostly spotlights maps that are up-and-comers, to take a look at this map. But I've since recanted on that idea. I've since reconsidered that thought process. And I actually want to extend the development of this map analysis series to all sorts of maps, including potentially Valve's own maps. So you might stay tuned for some of those in the future. This is obviously about Anubis, though. And what do I think of Anubis? The first thing that you might be thinking about if you haven't seen this map before or you haven't seen that much of it is, of course, the aesthetic. And this is something that, thanks to my interview show with the mappers themselves, the developers of this map themselves, I know a little bit about their thought process. And one of the things that everybody would always say about this map is that it looks kind of similar to Dust 2 or Mirage, more specifically Dust 2 after the remake. However, I think you'll find as we explore the map that it has a bit of a different color scheme going on. It's almost got that sort of oasis feel, where you've got the ferns, the foliage, the palm trees that have been reskinned slightly from the Dust 2 props, and all sorts of other things, like the water in the middle of the map that we'll go and explore in a second. I wanted to establish some starting words on the theme itself before we jump into the map itself, because I view this map as quite successful in what it does to try to remain somewhat consistent to what Counter-Strike maps generally exude in terms of the qualities that they have. But also, I view this map as pretty important for pushing, some of its own ideas, essentially. And we're going to actually jump into one of its own ideas right away. So exiting T-spawn here, we are going to do our brief map overview where we walk through the whole map. We are walking to mid and killing a chicken. And now we are in mid. This is about where you'll start to see some CTs, depending on who's rushing mid, and if there's a rusher mid. Now, as we have executed that chicken who is standing in our way, we can look into one of the map's defining features, this mid that drops into water. Now, there's a lot of really subtle things going on here, like the fact that because we're dropping into water, we're not worried about fall damage, and also the fact that were we to drop into the actual terrain, we wouldn't really be worried about fall damage anyway. Because of the fact that for one, it's so open, it's actually quite hard to fall from here into terrain that is not water. But I guess you would really have to try really hard on that, huh? Yeah, you'd actually have to jump, and even then, you still don't take fall damage. That's the mark of a very subtle but well-crafted map that really takes its time, I think. When you have a situation like that where you're actually looking here, and you're trying to give yourself fall damage, you can even make the sound for fall damage, and it still doesn't kill you. Still doesn't do damage to you. I think that's how you know there's something special going on here. So just wanted to point that out. It's a subtlety that people may not immediately notice, but that's one of those things that because I'm a quote-unquote expert with a million scare marks, I can tell you all about that. So let's jump into CT spawn from mid. Obviously, there's some double doors. They got a cute little ankh, courtesy of Yakuza, I believe. You can go check out my interview. Once again, I'll never stop showing that interview. Sorry, I keep forgetting to stop doing that. But we're jumping into CT spawn from mid. We got some guy named Chuck in here standing next to a chicken. And obviously, this is mid. It's also very, very sunny, very bright, lots of ferns, and all sorts of water to feast your eyes upon. One of the things that was really well done in this particular map, in my opinion, is the fact that, again, it's technically something somewhat similar visually to what we've seen in the past, but it does its own little spin on things, and because of that flavor, it ends up being very different than what we might have seen otherwise. In fact, if you're a really long-time follower of not just Anubis, but also my content specifically, you may remember that I actually did a map analysis video where I was very critical of the fact that the map looked very similar across every single part back and during one of those developmental videos, developmental stages of the particular map. So this is obviously before it was added officially to the game. This is far back, about a year ago. So that is something that I think they've done pretty well to address in general, because they recognized that the map is visually similar to other maps that have been added to the map pool, like Dust 2 and Mirage. We want to be able to separate ourselves from those maps. Okay, let's do a little bit of our own spin. Let's add some more color. Let's keep the theme differently. You got that like sort of orange and blue color scheme over here in the architecture over on the B-bomb site. There's all sorts of different things that go into that. So hats off to them. Props to them, we could say. Mapper jokes. Let's go back to T-spawn and walk to B. The reason why I wanted to show off mid is because of that drop and because of the fact that it does mean a lot for the map rotations. If we jump towards the B long area, the key distinction here is that there's a path where you elevate and a path where you sort of de-escalate, de-elevate, whatever you would go. You go down. So you can go up or you can go down, and you have to pick one of them. You can't really remain at the same height level. This makes the approach a little bit difficult for anybody who's trying to hold from the precise angle of over here, because you've got to deal with multiple height levels that the Ts could be coming from as a CT if you want to get aggressive. This is a very, very important thing to keep it in mind, because if there's going to be a CT pushing, he's actually going to want to throw a flashbang. He's actually going to want to, you know, chuck some utility and hope that that blinds somebody through the pillars, because he sucks at throwing utility in the middle of a map analysis video. So that's just some of the things that you're going to want to keep in mind when you're playing this site as a CT defender, is if you decide you want to go and do some information plays, you're going to want to be super cautious. You're going to want to clear a lot of different angles. I mean, for one, they could be right behind you, and you have no real way to check that. So there's a lot to go and take in just in this one area alone. Obviously, there are some going to be some lineups that you can find. I regret to inform you I've forgotten all of the ones. Actually, you know what? I think I just remembered one of them, which is burying yourself between the crate and the wall here, and then throwing it like here. I guess it was a little too high. I don't remember fully. Maybe it was down here. Yes, I believe this smokes off the B short area. There's also another slightly very, very similar, very close lineup that actually bounces off the side here, but also lands in the same position. I felt like a genius for figuring that one out. The one that I threw a little bit earlier will start to sort of casually smoke off the what you could call the CT B long position, the CT sort of elevated position over there. And that is a situation where obviously you might have like a really passive sniper being posted up here, or you might just have to deal with rotations from there. I actually would advise against playing all the way back here though, just because if the T's smoke here, right? Let's throw a smoke here just to test this hypothesis. So we throw this smoke here. We assume that that's somewhat like what we're dealing with here. Now we can see this line of sight. Players are not that tall. You are going to be able to get past this smoke without fearing anything other than a two-man boost, which would be really unlikely. So odds are you're not going to want to play all the way back there if you're holding, unless you're playing super passive and expecting a rotation, in which case, even if you do, you know, see that they hit this site, you are going to have to rotate into the sort of mid passageway, where obviously this will take you to mid from the CT angle. This will take you to the doors. This is the sort of connector area for the B bomb site, which you are going to have to make this very long rotation from the sniper's position, if you want to call it that, like the CT back position on B. You're going to have to take a very long rotation, at which point you might as well wait for the smoke to come out. But even then, your position is not very useful for your team, because either you're rotating or you're holding and looking at a smoke. So these are reasons why you want to play essentially on the site, and the developers have made sure that there's a lot of cover for you to work around while on the site. This is sort of like a ninja shadow position, I can imagine people would be calling it, because you could, in theory, try to hold into one of these spots and like wait for them to come to you. Maybe try to peek when they're planting the bomb if they don't clear you. But because of its sort of ubiquitous nature in a lot of maps, there's always like one or two spots on one of the bomb sites that you can hide in. You know, I'm thinking like overpass. If you like crouch and look at the ground, you can hide outside of bathrooms on A. There's like stuff like that. Obviously, the actual ninja spot in like towards the CT side of the A-bomb side of Mirage is a good example as well. There's all sorts of cool stuff like that have been in the maps before. People are going to start checking those in general. I think the average IQ of players, the average awareness of players is a bit higher than it was back in like 2015 or whatever. So you got to be aware of that. You don't want to be caught caught with your pants down, hoping that they don't check you, because they probably will. So especially if you've seen this map analysis video and then you go play matchmaking on this map, you'll know because you watch this video. So you know to check people over there. Obviously, you could also just throw a Molotov and do it relatively safely. And there's probably even a lineup that you can chuck it over or something, but I'm not aware of any because I haven't put that much time into this particular map's utility set, we'll say. Obviously, a couple of elevated positions here mean that it's not super easy to in essence, just completely hard clear the CTs. Like as you're coming down here, in theory, you'll have found some smokes for, maybe smoking off. I guess you could say like, yeah, you smoke off like what we smoked off earlier. And then if you can smoke this off as well, that is a really good position to smoke off because you neutralize the guy all the way in the back if he's there. You also neutralize the guy holding from connector if he's holding this position. You can essentially cross onto the site and then plant however you like. This is obviously an opportunity for you to then, as you come out, you have to hard clear this area, right? And then even then, there's just a little bit of space over here where the CT could be lying in wait. So, a couple of things to keep in mind as you're taking the site as Ts or as you're defending it as the CTs. Like if you see these smokes start to come off, you see the smoke land over there the way that I was throwing it earlier, that's a position where you have some travel time. You have some time to reposition. So if that smoke gets called out while you're holding water from the sort of, this is called the connector, I guess, but the mid connector to be, you're holding this underpass area, if you want to call it that, and you're waiting to see if they're coming out of spawn or anything like that, coming out of A, heading towards your direction, or waterfalling out of mid. That's a position where you can still hear the audio cues of the smoke. You can come back and look up here, and then using this pillar to reposition before the Ts actually activate, you can either step in front of the smoke, you can step to the side. There's a little bit of travel time on those smokes, sort of like some of the nuke smokes or whatever that people have seen pros sort of play around in different ways or try to stop and body block or whatever. There's lots of positions where you basically have a lot of opportunities to sort of play around the utility that's used. And that can help mitigate the power of the T-takes without them even necessarily knowing. They're just going to have to be very consistent with how they check stuff. And they're not going to be able to just ignore it in that sense. So if we were to walk from the CT spawn position, obviously I would not recommend actually walking, I would recommend jumping. And if we jump all the way to the A bomb site, first thing you're greeted with over here is this sort of wall, this half circle or quarter circle wall. One of the main utilities that this offers is the fact that rotations can be covered by very limited utility. Obviously there's limited areas, so if you smoke this off, and maybe if you drop a smoke over in this area, we'll just say over there, but imagine it was on top of the wall because you're sick and you found a lineup. This obviously limits the CT's ability to actually position outwards and aggressively. And you can't really boost on this position either because of the, well, for one, I think there's like a bit of collision over here, but this is me trying to jump and I can't. So this is obviously an opportunity where you have a lot of positions that are no longer available to you, more or less. And once those smokes go down, you can actually take the site, you isolate your fights. These are all different things that are possible thanks to the relatively open skybox on this map. As you can see by stuff like that. Obviously, you can also shoot through these windows, and everything's fine. There's a couple of different positions where I would recommend CTs holding from as a result of these two positions most likely being smoked. You may also see a smoke over here, which would isolate obviously anybody coming from this angle, from spawn, but also from the mid-rotation. They still have this window to play around with, but in theory you can get into a post-plant situation afterwards. So I would imagine that the smokes would come down more towards the choke points themselves as opposed to just CT. Maybe that's like read specific, obviously. But as a result of those being high-profile smoke targets, I would recommend that CTs play around in this position. Obviously, there's relatively simple pre-aims that people could do, so you want to try to be dynamic from this position, which is thankfully afforded by all of the different cover that you have, where you can do something like this to be very annoying, and you can kind of essentially bait for your team where you can like try to get a kill, and then it's going to be difficult to reposition, which is one of the reasons why I recommended maybe holding like an off angle over here, taking a fight, falling back, and then maybe even jumping down here and trying to take a lower fight. Establishing a crossfire from this sort of fountain position, this bath position, over from compared to that, and you could also have somebody holding over here, or maybe even holding a a much more passive angle where the T's have to commit to the site. They could be holding something like this. They could be the mid-rotator, as it were. They could be holding this angle from the connector and then fall back into A if they get pushed or if they get called to do so after maybe throwing a Molotov or something like that over there. Obviously, they could just... I imagine CTs, depending on if they've actually lost mid control or not, they might decide to smoke one of these positions and hold the other, or something to that effect. Obviously, more aggressive CT teams will just find some sort of lineup that will smoke off mid from this angle, maybe even a bit deeper so that you can maintain control over mid, the drop mid. So you might smoke this off over here, and then after that's smoked, you might just hold it from over here. Just by virtue of that being smoked, there's a lot more angles that the T's have to clear, so that's another thing to keep in consideration. And as a result, the gameplay is fairly dynamic depending on how you want to play it. There's room for aggressive play styles. There's room for more concerted, like Astralis 2019, tactical grind you out play styles. And there's room for somewhere in between as well. And one of the probably the most unique aspects of this map, if you had to ask me, was the fact that pretty much all aspects of these potential play styles are made possible in, obviously, to different extremes, but I think every aspect of the map has it, because the T's themselves can threaten vertically, not just horizontally, not just where they are in an XY, but also a Z coordinate. They can go down mid and essentially potentially take fights with somebody in the B connector, somebody in the actual middle. They can obviously adjust their default to come through this upraised area, which is obviously where I went before. So if we go from T-spawn, instead of going to the lower area, they can completely bypass any CT attenders. So you can't 100% know that there's going to be a rush coming unless you, unless you scout. But even then, it's like A rush is much more possible without as much advance warning than compared to a B rush, which I'm sure will be upsetting to some Russians. Obviously, they prefer to rush B as opposed to rushing A, but it's all the same over here. And you guys got a crazy fucking alphabet. You can just change the letter. So if we go to mid again, we can choose to try to take fights from here, or we can find a smoke that will not go there. Hold on. I'm trying to remember where all of my smoke lineups were because I found a bunch of them. I think something like this will smoke over there. I think maybe if you come over here, you might find some success. Or maybe it was over here. Well, let's just see where that one went. Okay, so that one just smokes that off. Obviously, you want to go a little bit deeper than that so that you can smoke the... oh, wait, no, that one was actually supposed to be a smoke for doors, so never mind. Yeah, so there's going to be some smoke that you can line up from spawn that will smoke over here and allow you to, in theory, threaten to drop down water, in which case you probably want to run that default to throw that smoke, almost like it's a mid-window smoke on Mirage, or sort of like a top of mid smoke so that you can go out on Mirage. And I imagine if you want to default on this map as a T, you'd probably send only one guy towards B to maybe threaten with some utility and just try to hold people, CTs, from flanking, because like I said earlier, there's so many different angles that lurking or pushing CT has to clear. So you can play around like this position, which cleverly enough, this line of sight is such that it blocks you from actually seeing if one of them has like peeked out. But you can also hold a little bit more forward. You can hold something like this, and then if you are found, you can retreat and jump over here and elevate your position. So that would probably be the B-lurk, or whatever you want to call that, as part of the default. You would then have somebody who throws that spawn smoke that goes over there and then tries to threaten any CT, maybe spams it a little bit. This is almost like Banana, but obviously Banana doesn't allow, on Inferno B side, doesn't allow you to just rotate towards another bomb site through mid. So you would almost conceptualize it as like that because you want to fight over this. These like little bits of terrain are really, really important. So you want to fight over this. So obviously as T's, the default would be to throw that smoke similar to Mirage, try to get mid control in that respect. You can drop down. I would recommend dropping down as somebody else from your default is peeking from the stairs area so that he can sight somebody who is holding the B connector. In fact, depending on how aggressive the utility usage is on the maps from the Ts, CTs might even adapt by putting an opper at this angle and try to like get a pick on anybody who's peeking down here. But the idea behind dropping at the same time is to give him multiple sort of targets to look at. So you're dropping as this guy is peeking. Obviously, if it's a rifler, he might have there's a longer time to kill than if he hits a shot with an op, which is why it might be better to just op and then fall back. So you want to almost like jiggle this guy because of that. And this is almost like treated like Dust 2. I would say like this is almost like the Dust 2 corner where you always want to smoke or something. Obviously, another thing that you could do if you wanted to completely isolate this position is have whoever's mid not be the guy who threw the smoke, or maybe he throws a Molotov instead. And he can line himself up while that's smoked, and he can throw something like this. If we aim at the top of that little leftmost pyramid. And this will Molotov just the initial front place. Obviously, you can still hold back on this, which is why I would recommend a smoke. You almost could do something like Molotoving, and like maybe if we run throw while that's happening or something. No, that doesn't work. So, yeah, a smoke from that angle might be actually better in that respect. Let's see how that looks. So if you deploy a smoke like this completely locks off this line of sight, and then you can freely aggress towards A. You can threaten towards A. You can also take a preemptive position to explode out from mid and the B long area onto B if you want to. There's all sorts of different things that you can do from that permutation. So you can throw that smoke while this is smoked, and suddenly you've got the ability to drop down water from mid, the ability to explode towards B from mid, the ability to just completely lurk out mid without anybody attacking you at all, without having to fire through a smoke, obviously, and threaten towards A. There's all sorts of different things that you have as a T. And as a result, until CTs adapt to that sort of meta of utility, I feel like this is a really strong default position where you have like one or two guys popping out from lower. I would actually recommend like probably two guys pop out the safe way, just so you have a guaranteed two-man split, and also because you can line up really good utility over here. You could probably like have somebody flash you into the site, as it were. And I think that will blind anybody who's like even holding over here. Although it might just be a half blind. Yeah, it's only for a flash. Like, no pun intended there. But there's like flashes that you can throw from the around this area. Like if you drop over here, you can obviously just chuck a flash into there. You can, in theory, flash people off of angles in this actual sort of A short area as you're coming in. So there's a couple of different lineups there. Obviously, I haven't practiced the lineups specifically themselves. You can find lineups for Anubis all over YouTube, I'm sure, since it was added, and people have a competitive stake in doing so. But with that sort of your default as a T, the CT default should adapt to it, and as a result of that, you're going to see, I think, very mobile oppers have a lot of success on this map, and this is like a simple map, you know what I mean? Like, if you looked at Simple's POVs on Mirage and on some of the other maps that he's obviously played more recently, there's all sorts of different things that Simple tries to do on the CT side, where he tries to reposition himself so that they don't really know which side he's holding. They don't really know where he is. He is the superstar, and you must neutralize him, but you don't know where he is until you go there. And there's really only so much that film can do for you if you just know he's going to be dynamic. That kind of approach to an opper here, you can find success at pretty much all of the sites, disproportionately in this B connector position. Obviously, if you do decide to play a one-and-done angle and you don't get smoked off from this back spawn area on the B bomb site, that can also be helpful. But I would just in general recommend you opping from connector, because even though you might get smoked off, in theory, if they drop a smoke over here, say, while you could jump spot for info, you could just react to anybody sort of showing up on the radar from being spotted by another teammate, and all sorts of other things. So while I'm not sure how pros would deconstruct this map, I do believe that this is a solid default to run on this map. And this is actually something that I can say, knowing that people might actually be able to put it to use, because this is in the game. So you can actually do these things. It's crazy, I know. And ultimately, the fact that you can decide to explode onto a site, the fact that you can even conceptualize defaults super easily on this map, And there's all sorts of opportunities that I didn't really talk about specifically, but there's all sorts of different tricks that you can do. You can throw utility off of different things. This is sort of like a primer to get you into the map. It's a little bit more gameplay focused than necessarily questioning a lot of the design decisions themselves, because Valve has already said, hey, this map is good enough for CSGO. Like, this is a CSGO map. This is something that we can officially add. So not only do Valve agree with my assessment that this map would be cool for general play, but you yourself can check that assumption. You can consider whether or not Valve and I are crazy or not, and you can decide, hey, I'm going to try this map out. So I definitely encourage you to do that. And this is actually, I mean, I'm not lying when I say the best way you can support community mappers is by actually playing their maps when they're added to the pool. Even if maybe it's a game mode that you're not used to, or, obviously like hostage maps sometimes get added. Obviously, they had that Jungle Tea Danger Zone map that was added somewhat recently, so there's that as an opportunity. There's all sorts of different things that you can do. But as long as you give those maps some playtime, the mappers will see some sort of result as a result of it. They'll see some stats, they'll see some figures from Valve, they'll be able to potentially make improvements, and depending on how many people opt in and play, you might just find out that Valve has decided to add it to a more official standpoint. We're all waiting for them to make map pool changes. They know we're waiting for them to make map pool changes. So vote with your playtime is all I can say there. And once again, check out my interview with Roald, JD40, and Yakuza. They're pretty cool guys, pretty chill. It was like a 2-hour long affair, so long form content for you. And I hope you appreciated this map analysis breakdown of Anubis. Obviously, like I said, more gameplay focused, but as far as the qualitative analysis is concerned, I think the fact that we can even do a 25-minute breakdown of the potential gameplay options that you have and looking at the different angles and considering the sort of design decisions that went into it, I think that sort of tells you this map is a cut above some of the other maps. And Valve obviously agree as well. So let's see if you agree. Go play it. That's all I have to say. And now I'll jump out window.